How is this still going on? This first been going for way too long. If you ain't blind, you can see that this is wrong. And I won't comply. Not me, no way.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. We've got a Liberal MP announcement that was derailed by hecklers and protesters. Not so much derailed. He stood there and he did it, and he went through with the announcement. The announcement was for a COVID hotel style thing that is built for migrant workers, and they're extending the funding for it. People were asking, what about the vaccine? If the vaccine works, why do we need to extend the funding for this? And clearly the vaccine, right, doesn't look like it's doing what they promised, what they were removing people from platforms for questioning the efficacy of, etc. And now we've got government funds being extended to support quarantine when most of the time, I don't even think the province has quarantine in the policies surrounding COVID now. So there's all sorts of bad policies like this that are getting money, taxpayer money, yours and mine, and people are upset. And I'm going to show you the video of that. So health, recruitment, and closures. It is very difficult to get a doctor in Nova Scotia. It's very difficult to get a doctor in Newfoundland. In Nova Scotia, they've got a list of 100,000 people who are waiting for a doctor or access to a family doctor, and that's pretty wild. I think that's a very high number and shockingly high for a place like Canada. We should be able to provide healthcare. If not, what are we paying for? Because it's very expensive to pay. I think it's in Ontario anyway. It's the third or fourth biggest budget expense. It's the top four line items, or it's one of the top four line items behind education, debt repayment, healthcare, education, debt repayment, healthcare, and the rest of the social services like police, etc., police, fire, all that kind of stuff. So it seems like if we're paying for healthcare but not able to access healthcare, and this is Atlantic provinces a little bit, but I'm going to show you an Ontario emergency room that's closed for 6 nights, because they can't staff it. The Guelph General Hospital fired 22 healthcare workers, and they're using a nurse staffing agency to staff the emergency room so we don't experience staff shortages. What does that cost? It's unbelievable that that's the answer. The Minister of Health, Canada's Minister of Health, this isn't a joke. He says that the COVID vaccines and your body are like a cell phone battery. Your body is like a cell phone battery, and the COVID vaccines charge up your cell phone battery, and you have to take more COVID vaccines. That's what they want. That's the whole thing. That's what he says. I'm going to show you the video of that. It's wild. And a new wealth tax. Oh, you bet. Why not, right? They've got carbon taxes. They've got taxes on taxes. They're going to tax the farmers. They're going to tax the fertilizer. They're going to tax yachts and all of that too. So they're going to do a wealth tax. This is to appease the NDP, I'm sure. But any new tax is a tax that the federal Liberals like, and the federal NDP will get behind. So, I mean, keep voting for new taxes and don't be surprised when things cost more, because that's where we're going. And Facebook was pressured by Joe Biden. This is not new, but the revelations are more firm. There's emails and a whole task force. Apparently they had weekly calls to make sure that they could censor exactly who they wanted to censor. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than weekly, if they had people working on that full time. But still, it's wild. And we knew this was happening with Twitter, although all of that news is buried. I tried to look for, I can't even remember the doctor's name. I tried to look for his name and remind you of this story, because basically what happened was the doctor wanted to sue Twitter. Twitter said, no, you can't sue us. It was the federal government who wanted us to do this to you. So the judge said, okay, well, show us that it was the federal government. They did. All of that's in litigation now, and I can't for the life of me find anything about it. Dr. S? I don't think, Dr. Shiva? That doesn't sound right, but I can't remember, and I can't find it because the internet's garbage. I'm going to show you as well. I looked for the Joe Biden speech. There was a Joe Biden speech yesterday, and a whole lot of people are directly comparing it to some speeches given by Adolf Hitler. And I'm going to show you the direct comparisons and show you the speech by Hitler. So it's very interesting what's going on in our Western world at this point in time. And well, let's get started. First, if you want to support the show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. You can check out the forums. They're free. You can do a one-time payment or a monthly subscription. You can check out my book. I'm going to do Jeepers Creepers and a Holy Smoke, and there was some other requests for new mugs and etc. But there's a Holy Smokeronis and Bingo Bango Bongo mug and all of the other phrases and things that I say. And if you want to check out all the links, you can head over to CanadaReport.co and you can check out Locals. That's another way to support the show. And I don't know why the link's not up there, but I moved it because my whole studio moved, etc., etc. So apologies about that. But let's get started. First, here is the CPC. And I think they're going to Joe Biden the CPC. Or I think the CPC is going to Joe Biden itself. I think they're going to put Charest in, but we'll see. We'll see. This guy says, let's say Charest wins, hypothetically, in 9 days. What happens then? How do people react? I think it's a very interesting thought experiment to consider the response of the CPC. I think probably how people will react is the CPC goes down in flames. Here it is. Ryan says it best right here. I read this morning. I thought, yep, that's it. He says, CPC comes apart. It takes 2 election cycles to recover. I say might be 3. Likely under a different banner. Yeah, so it wouldn't be the CPC. The CPC would fall apart just like the PCs did under Charest and Kim Campbell. Trudeau continues spending into oblivion, and Canada has a financial crisis akin to what Greece went through. Yeah, yep. I would say that's a pretty good, back of the napkin. Like, if this continues, carry the 2. Yeah, right? Could be. I hope not. Like, I desperately hope not. When I was talking about Trump avoiding all of this is kind of what I was talking about. Out of control rent prices, out of control food prices, out of control spending by the government, triggering out of control inflation, triggering hard times. And we didn't avoid it, did we? Well, oh well. But here we are, and we have to deal with it. So, one thing that whole thing taught me, there's a mosquito here, and I thought he was dead, and he's not, and he's going to be dead now. That the Trump thing taught me, sorry, killed a mosquito live on my show today, was that even if you want somebody to save you, and even if it looks like that might be happening, you're still responsible to do it yourself. You're still responsible to take care of your life in the way that you would want it sorted out. Otherwise, you're going to be subject to somebody else's whims, and they might not align with yours. So take the bull by the horns, if you will. Even if there is a savior, don't count on it. If somebody else comes and saves you, they're going to do their version, not yours, right? It's like going to a party and thinking, oh man, everybody's looking hungry. Where's that cake? Those kids need cake. Where's the cake? And then the parents seem oblivious, and you're like, oh goodness me, I need to help with this, right? Maybe you don't feel like that, but occasionally, right? If you're at somebody else's thing and you're not in charge of it, and you think, I wouldn't do it that way, think about that, but your life, right? You don't want that. Promise you. Okay, Michael says, let's get into government. So, a luxury tax heading into a recession where the wealthy may already be cutting back or buy elsewhere. Window dressing at best. The really wealthy, who the libs cater to with the tax avoidance features regular folks can only dream of, will surely not be affected. And Brian Lilly is reporting another tax from Trudeau's Liberals, because after 7 years of raising taxes, the wealthy still aren't paying their fair share, according to Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. This tax may hurt blue-collar workers, though. Read and retweet. So this is the yachts tax and luxury items tax. And if there's a Canadian company that makes these things, whether it's yachts or whatever it is, and they employ people, and they said, oh, okay, we see that Canada doesn't want their citizens to buy these things, or if they do, they want them to pay all this extra money. We're just going to move our business to a place that is more friendly to businesses, that allows us to sell our goods without those punitive taxes, and will allow the ultra rich people who can afford to maybe travel down to a nice place to have a nice weekend vacation while they shop for their yacht. And it might cost less than the taxes they would just pay if they were to buy it up in Canada, conveniently or whatever. They'll do that. And then everybody lives in Florida and has a party with DeSantis. Right? I mean, come on. It's win-win, except for us Canadians who are stuck in Canada with idiots like Justin Trudeau in charge, putting these idiotic policies in place. Here's Maxime Bernier. He's talking about governance and immigration. I've been talking about immigration for a while because I feel like, my parents were immigrants, and my grandfather came to Canada before my father's family came over and worked for a few years before he could bring his family over, et cetera, et cetera. It was hard, et cetera. So I don't think it's a good practice to lie to people about the opportunities that are available here with regards to cost of housing, with regards to cost of food, with regards to opportunities that are not available elsewhere, etc. I just think that it's not responsible to pretend that Canada is this place of unending opportunity when the reality is on the ground it's different, right? Maxime Bernier says higher immigration pushes up housing prices, which discourages young people from having children. Politicians then say how low birth rates justify bringing in more immigrants, which pushes up housing prices, and it's a cycle, you see? So this is the Vancouver Sun saying BC now has the lowest fertility rate in Canada. Home prices are partly to blame. Yeah, we did have at one point. The 1980s was dicey. The 1990s was ending. The 2000s, you needed 2 incomes to own a home, pretty much. By 2005, anyway, for the most part. But having a single income, being able to run a family, and at one point, you could have a single income and you could buy a house on that income. You could have a car, maybe 2 on that income. You could gas up the car, take the kids to whatever things they needed to go to. This is all on one income, or maybe 1.5, maybe a part-time job for a homemaker or something to that effect. But a lot of times that was barter. Like my mom did childcare for other people's kids, etc. And so that kind of stuff helped out to have extras, right? But whatever. That's how the 80s was. And now we're in a situation, and so in a situation where you're stable like that and you feel like you have excess capacity, you could deal with any crisis, you take a risk, like have a kid, because there's never a good time for a baby, but it's always a good time for a baby, right? So have babies, it's wonderful. But if you don't feel like you have extra to spare, if you feel like we're barely getting by at the end of the month, people will tell you you're irresponsible for having babies. You could make a different choice, get rid of it, blah, 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 blah. And so the whole push for not being a parent, not taking on that next phase of your life, keeps people in a state of adolescence, keeps people in a state of self narcissism. There's a word, and usually I can pause it faster than this. Egotistical, maybe. They're self-centered. Self-centered is the word. Egotistical, self-centered. Before you have a kid, you don't understand that there's other things that are more important than you, because up until that point, you've had a parent or something to that effect who's focused on you as an important being, more important than anybody else, because you're their child. Once you have a child, you understand that you're not as important. And I think it's as important a life event as puberty. I think it's as changing for people as puberty. And the more people who choose not to have children are more people who maybe don't get to go into that next phase of life. And I'm not saying that you have to have children, like you have to go through the act of birthing a child, et cetera, et cetera. You can be involved in a niece or nephew's life. You can be involved in another human's life in a way that they're important to you, that you're going to help them, even if they screw up, right? Even if they're stupid and make stupid mistakes, right? And you're going to help them because that's your job. That's the next phase, I guess. And I think it's as important for humans to go through as puberty. If you keep a society not going through this artificially, I think that it keeps people self-centered and easy to control. That's a long way to say that, sorry. But Maxime Bernier is pointing out this cycle that our politicians are continually excusing. The reason the politicians say we're not having babies and so we need to bring in more immigrants is because the tax base, the amount of people who are paying taxes, pays for certain services, etc. And if there are fewer people, then the tax base collapses. They don't have the money to pay for the services, and so you have to cut back on the services. So in order to continue the services, it's a catch-22. In order to continue the services, you have to necessarily keep that amount of people. But if the people aren't having babies, then the politicians say, well, if you want social service, well, we need to bring in all of these people. So people get on board with it because they're being threatened with their livelihood. But they don't realize they're in a catch-22 situation where the longer you do this, the less control you have, the less you're raising the next generation as you import them, right? And that's Canada's goal. Read the immigration tenets for former governor generals. I've highlighted this a couple of times. But Canada wants to be a country that the growth is 100% attributed to immigration. Is that the country you want to live in? It's kind of a scary prospect to me, right? Tom Quiggin says, are we wondering why Chrystia Freeland was in Grand Prairie? The Liberal government has a plan to kneecap Alberta's oil industry by expanding caribou and grizzly reserves. Note the expansion of this one at Grand Prairie. For more on this, see, and he's got a Facebook link. It's interesting, again, how they're going to use the environment to excuse shutting down oil and gas and money-making and energy-making, stability-making projects in Canada, and they say the only reason for this is environmental. It has nothing to do with any other, power or anything like that. It's strictly environmental, nothing else. Grizzly bears are more important than a viable oil and gas industry in Canada? I don't know. Vivian says, Justin Trudeau will follow up. What does that mean? So remember yesterday when I told you that CSIS agents were trafficking children? A Canadian CSIS agent was trafficking British children into ISIS territory, and they knew that, and they withheld information and covered it up. And now, apparently, when questioned about it, according to the Washington Post, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his country would follow up on allegations that one of its spies smuggled 3 British schoolgirls to Islamic State militants in Syria. Follow up. I wonder what that means. Is that like the Nova Scotia Nova Scotia shooting inquiry, or is that like the emergencies inquiry? Right? The SNC Lavalin, was there an SNC Lavalin inquiry? Right? All of these things, nothing happens ever. Nothing ever happens. It's unbelievable, and it continues. So Vivian says, Justin Trudeau will follow up. What does that even mean? Is that before or after he convenes with Melanie Joly? If CSIS did as alleged, it seems to be conduct way beyond the organization's statutory powers. I'd say a follow-up is urgent, like more important than Tofino, to me, Prime Minister. So it's very interesting, that kind of stuff as well, when the country's spy agency is trafficking allies' kids to terrorist organizations. You'd think that it'd be a problem worth more than, oh yeah, we'll totally follow up with CSIS about that. Thanks. Yeah, let me make a note in my Palm Pilot here. Here's Chrystia Freeland saying, I'm not gonna make anybody endure the head tilt. You can see the tone in how she bobs her head. Anyway, Chrystia Freeland says truckers are truly essential to the economy and thanks them for working through the pandemic. 7 months ago, Freeland froze the bank accounts and suspended the licenses of truckers protesting her government's vaccine mandates. So it's very, to me, again, Chrystia Freeland coming out and saying truckers are integral and truly essential is very hollow. There isn't a trucker who's watching this who wasn't aware of the convoy and exactly what these people have done. So doing this, who is this for? Who's the audience? Who's she talking to? Is she talking to truckers, do you think? Is she talking to the general public who don't know any truckers and who think, oh, isn't Chrystia being nice for talking about the truckers and how they're essential? I don't know who the heck she's talking to here. Do you want to listen to it? I don't want to listen to it. There's far too many. Even watching it on silent just kind of makes my skin crawl. So I don't want to subject anybody to having to listen to her. But hollower words have not often been spoken. So, and I just don't have the patience to listen to Chrystia Freeland. So we're going to move on. Health. Hospital in Kemptville, Ontario says ER closed for 6 nights due to staffing shortages. So, get your healthcare somewhere else, peasant. Oh, you're not allowed because there's no private systems allowed because the government says we're providing healthcare because it's free and you're not allowed to offer it for a private service at all? We're right. Exactly. So if you have an emergency, good luck. We hope you don't die-ish. So that's where we're at in Ontario. Yay! Here's what's happening in Nova Scotia. Doctor recruitment in Nova Scotia compared to Newfoundland Osborne. The province's health minister is firing back at the opposition for suggesting that Nova Scotia is beating Newfoundland and Labrador when it comes to the recruitment of physicians. Provinces across the country are working hard at recruiting more physicians and other healthcare professionals to fill the demand. Health Minister Tom Osborne says that when you look at the numbers, this province and Nova Scotia are not that far apart. He says Nova Scotia has approximately 100,000 people on the registry without a family physician, and the number could be much higher because not everyone is registered. Osborne says the number of physicians hired in Nova Scotia that the opposition has been using doesn't tell the whole story. The opposition says 160 doctors have signed up in Nova Scotia in the last 12 months. Osborne has asked the Nova Scotia government for numbers and says between April 1 and June 30th of this year, they hired 21 doctors, but 15 retired, so a net gain of just 6. So wild. The province yesterday increased the signing bonus it's offering physicians willing to set up practice in Newfoundland, for at least 5 years from $100,000 to $150,000, the highest incentive offered in Atlantic Canada, according to the government. Osborne said they've already seen an uptake in physicians signing on. So people are saying, yeah, sure, I'll go to Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, but I'm just trying to highlight the numbers with regards to how many people are waiting for a doctor or access to healthcare in this wonderful free system we have here that doesn't seem to be working and seems to be collapsing in real time. Right? So it's weird. It's so weird. I was in Corner Brook yesterday, and it was pretty cool. I like Corner Brook. It's a beautiful place. You can see the mountains in the background. And I saw this sign as we pulled up to the McDonald's, and it says they're hiring, and they've got a lady with a head covering and an Asian guy. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting choice. And then we walked up to the door, and they had visit us on hiring Mondays, and there's 2 Indian people, right? An Indian guy and an Indian girl. And not First Nations Indian, not Aboriginal Indian. I'm talking like Indian from Mumbai or India, right? Okay, again, I thought, that's so weird, right? It's McDonald's. I just wanted to show you the sign. And then on the other door, because I went outside and we went to the mall, and the mall in Corner Brook reminds me of Stone Road Mall. If they had a New York Fries and a Baskin Robbins, it would be Stone Road Mall circa 1989. And it made me kind of happy. I was like, oh man, it's all dark, just the same. So here is the other door, and it's got keeping families closer, and it's a racialized family. There wasn't one picture of a white person working in this store that I could find. And I thought that was strange. And I thought, what are the demographics of Corner Brook? And somebody said, here are the demographics of Corner Brook. White, 69.4%. Aboriginal, 29.5%. I did not see any of those on the posters. Visible minorities, 1%. Now said. So the issue here for me is they want to solve the healthcare crisis by importing foreign nurses. And in Corner Brook, it's not just foreign nurses that they want. It's anybody who looks nothing like the people who live at Corner Brook. And I think that's notable. Isn't one of the tenets of this whole thing representation? Shouldn't you look like the people they want to hire, right? And I don't have a problem, again, having a whole bunch of different people represented through the advertisements and displays. But don't you think that the local population should be represented? Isn't that something that's important to the anti-racist types? Anti-racism is racism, by the way. But people who espouse these equality, equity, seeing people who look like you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is important. So why is that not important for the demographic who is the majority demographic? Why is seeing people who look like you represented in the hiring pictures? We'd love to hire you. Come in now, right? Nobody looks like me. None of these people look like me, which is the problem that was used to justify all of the incentives to have racialized people, etc., on these images. But why not use Aboriginal people? Why not use a mix of people? Why not have white people there? Why not? You have to wonder. I wonder. Is that on purpose? Of course it's on purpose. Yes, that is on purpose. You have to wonder why. McDonald's. CTV News, moving into the vaccines, etc. Declue says getting a COVID-19 booster should be topping your fall to-do list. This is a video of Declue talking about how important this is, and I think he looks foolish. He looks foolish with the headphones on like this. Okay, here's Declue talking about how important it is. Here we go. I got to make sure that
various vaccine protection is like a phone battery. It needs to be recharged from time to time. Recharging our protection after 6 months is important. Otherwise, we are left without the power to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Getting everyone caught up with a vaccination is a top priority. This is not only true for COVID-19 vaccinations, but also for routine vaccinations for all children and adults. Merci. Thank you. Miigwech.
Okay. Let's take that apart a little bit. Have vaccines ever been compared to phone batteries before? If so, where? Was that effective at all? I don't think that recharging your protection is something that they had to do in, I don't know, like 100 years ago, right? And okay, there are some vaccines that people take, et cetera, but again, if there's anything these last couple of years taught me, it's to be skeptical. And there's some very interesting things, correlations coming out of the year of COVID, the year of lockdowns. The SIDS instances went way down in a year where people were not getting their kids vaccinated on the correct schedule because of hospital closures, et cetera, hospital closures, healthcare closures. I think this is UK data, and I don't have it in front of me, so apologies that I don't have it. I read it the other day, and I thought that's an interesting thing. But if SIDS disappeared the same year vaccinating kids disappeared in certain areas, that's an uncanny thing. That's interesting, don't you think? And so that's what I mean. When crazy things happen, sometimes revelations happen, right? And things that you don't expect. Because before this whole COVID vaccine thing happened and pandemic happened, I was questioning things, certainly, but not willing to believe even the level of insanity that we've seen that has been proven, that has just come out, that Facebook, Twitter would be pressured by governments to silence citizens. That's pretty round the bend nuts. If you went back to 2018 and said there's going to be proof and pretty much nobody's going to care, people wouldn't believe you. They'd think that people would be up in arms. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about Facebook censoring. Nobody cares about any of that kind of stuff. Here's an Australian internment camp surrounded by psycho commie Muppets, says Uncle Nestor. And this is also stuff that I don't think people would believe. This is Australia, right? Think of yourself in 2015, right? Or 2016. And here's a picture of Australia 2022. Here we go.
So am I allowed to go to the laundry?
You're allowed to go to the laundry, but you got to wear a mask, yeah?
Yeah, righto.
And you definitely can't go up to fencing routes, but you're allowed to go to the laundry, yeah? That's always been the case, yeah?
Right, so if I was sitting just here, which is right near the fence, why are these guys in a cabin that's right near the fence? It makes no sense, does it?
Yeah, but you can't leave your balcony to go to the fence to talk to somebody else. That's what's obvious, yeah?
So if I was
Again,
at
it
that
doesn't have to
balcony...
make sense. There has to be lines everywhere drawn, yeah? And one of the lines is you cannot leave your balcony and you cannot go to someone else. Where it makes no sense or it doesn't seem right to you, that is the line, and that's what the law is, yeah? And that's how it goes, yeah?
That's my favorite part of the whole thing. There have to be lines drawn. And if they don't make sense or they don't make sense to you, it doesn't matter. That's the law, and that's what you got to do. No, man, no. You're totally off base and wrong. If the laws that are in place don't make rational sense, then the law is wrong, and we need to fix it. Not, well, you just got to do it because reasons, because safety, comrade. Absolutely foolish. And so the point that she's making was there's the cabin over by the fence, and how come they can talk to people over the fence and I can't go by the fence the same distance as the cabin? It doesn't make any sense. And they say, well, just listen because those are the rules. That's what's coming. That's what they want. They want you to just comply without any kind of pushback. Here's the Liberal MP who's talking about the vax internment camp, right? The virus internment camp. They're talking about it and using it currently as for temporary workers, for fruit pickers and things like that, if they're needing isolation. So here's that announcement, and the whole thing's interesting. Here you go.
Questions until then. And now I'd like to introduce Parliamentary Secretary Eric Kuzmerchek.
So he's not an elected MP.
No applause.
Good morning, everyone.
Who voted on this?
Who voted for this?
Delighted to be here.
So he's running a program. He's reading his speech. He's pretending that the audience is responding the way he's expecting. At the beginning, he's going through his French and, morning everybody, in French and English, and he's going through his pattern here. He's not responding to the crowd. He's not taking this away and thinking, oh man, I should change what's happening. He's turning them off and getting his stuff out. It's an act. It's part of the show, right? Here we go.
Here this morning and to see so many supporters of our migrant workers here in Essex County. So it's wonderful to see such tremendous support for the health and safety and protection of our migrant workers in southwestern Ontario and across Canada.
No support for your bullshit.
Well, I'd like to begin. Thank you very much. What about our homeless? We got shame on you.
Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you.
Nobody wants another Auschwitz here.
That's right. Because of your boss's mandate. Isolation for who? For the migrant workers? Really? And then where is it going to go from there? And it's going to spread out to everywhere else. And what are you isolating from? The goddamn monkeypox, COVID-19, COVID-20, COVID-21? It's all bullshit.
What happened to the vaccine?
It's all about goddamn money. That's all it is. Build a goddamn building. We need that. We need a fucking hole in the head.
They cost a lot of our money.
Who the fuck are you?
How do we isolate humans when we haven't isolated the COVID-19 virus yet?
Absolutely.
Where's the new
Look at that smug look.
Do not comply.
We don't want it. Yeah. We don't want it. We don't want it.
So people are not happy, and they're making their displeasure known. And every time the Liberals are dealing with protests, that's terrorism, right? Those people might be accused of terrorism at some point in the future. The RCMP might knock on their door and say, you were a part of this anti-government protest, and you need to come with us. You were exposed to COVID-19. Is that plausible? Is that something that is you could see happening? I watched the RCMP go to churches and take pictures of the people's license plate. I watched that in 2020 and 2021. I watched them use Toronto police to shut down a restaurant. The things that have happened are completely unbelievable and absolutely. I don't think that saying they're criminal is too far, and the accountability for this doesn't exist. I saw this tweet and I thought, I'm going to have to look into this. I'm going to have to see if Hitler said this. Yesterday, Joe Biden was doing an address to the public, and a lot of people are making comparisons. Joe Biden didn't say this, okay? Hitler said this. But there is so many comparisons to what we're living now, not necessarily with Joe Biden, but with Justin Trudeau, that I thought I need to show you this. So here's Consent Factory, and he's got Joe Biden's image from the speech last night. But this is a Hitler speech. Quote, "Dissension and hatred have made their way into our midst." And later in the speech, "Farmers, workers, and the middle class must join together to create the building blocks for a new Reich." That's Adolf Hitler in February 1933. So I looked for that speech. Here it is, right? Hitler's first address as chancellor. And so I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I just want to highlight the parts that were quoted in that tweet. Here's the dissension and hatred have made their way into our midst. In the most profound distress, millions of the best Germans, men and women from all walks of life, watch as the unity of the nation vanishes and dissolves in a muddle of political and egotistical opinion, economic interests, and differences. So he was a populist, right? Sounds like Trump. Further down, peasants, workers, so this is the farmers and middle class, and bourgeoisie must all join together to provide the building blocks for the new Reich. So he's saying we're working hard for the middle class and those wishing to join it. Right? So I just think it's very interesting. A lot of people were not very happy with Biden's address last night as well. The visuals and the rhetoric were disturbing for a lot of people. Here's Paul Joseph Watson. He says, standing in front of a blood red background and Marines used as props Thursday, Joe Biden declared that his political opponents and those who support them are dangerous extremists that threaten the existence of the country. Right. So that was on the heels of yesterday's press secretary talking about how the MAGA Republicans were radicalized and dangerous to the democracy, etc. Tim Young says, I'm not saying fascism officially had its coming out party in America tonight. I'm just saying Biden condemned his political opponents as a threat to American and democracy set to a blood red background with the military standing behind him. There you go. So what do you think? Joe Biden. Here is Ricky Lake. This is one of the best answers to the media. Oh, Carrie Lake, it's right there. To the media's 2020 election questions I've ever heard. So they're still trying to demonize Trump for asking and saying that the 2020 election was stolen. And Carrie Lake was just elected the governor of Arizona, I do believe. And she's responding to the question here. And she ties it all back into free speech. What they're going to try and do is use hatred and the potential for violence. Your hate speech could potentially incite violence, and so we have to limit your speech, because if we don't limit your speech, there might be violence. You see, they're going to use that excuse to silence people, and she's responding to this question about Trump asking questions with a very good defense of free speech. Here we go.
So you said you feel like Joe Biden is dividing the country, but do you feel like Donald Trump is doing the same by falsely telling people that he won that election when he lost it?
The question was, you say that Joe Biden's dividing the country, but don't you think Donald Trump is dividing the country by saying he won an election in 2020 when he lost it? That was the question.
How does that divide the country? Questioning an election where there are obviously problems is dividing the country? Since when can we not ask questions about our elections? As a journalist for many years, I was a journalist after 2016, and I distinctly remember many people just like you asking a lot of questions about the 2016 election results. And nobody tried to shut you up. Nobody tried to tell Hillary Clinton to shut up. Nobody tried to tell Kamala Harris when she was questioning the legitimacy of these electronic voting machines to stop. We have freedom of speech in this country, and you of all people should appreciate that. You're supposedly a journalist. You should appreciate that. So I don't see how asking questions about an election where there are many problems is dividing a country. What I do see dividing a country is shutting people down, censoring people, canceling people, trying to destroy people's lives when they do ask questions. Last I heard, we still have the Constitution. It's hanging by a thread, thanks to some of the work some people in this area have done. But we're going to save that Constitution, and we're going to bring back freedom of speech. And maybe someday you'll thank us for that.
So, right, interesting. I think that the goal is to shut down the ability to have any kind of question on anything. I think that if you don't support the government line, then you will be removed from society and digitally erased, digitally canceled, removed. They don't care if you starve because you're alt-right, probably white supremacist. And to them, judge, jury, and executioner, unless you get on board with their insane critical race theory, gender ideology, radical gender ideology, all of these things, then you're out. So is it better to be in or out? If you can't question anything, if you have to go along with this nonsense, better to be in or out? I think probably out, right? Hate. Madam Minister, says Hillier Noru, and he's responding to Chrystia Freeland. Chrystia Freeland says, anti-Semitism is real, and we must confront it, condemn it, and fight it in all its forms. Organizations run by people promoting anti-Semitic, racist, and xenophobic views must not receive public funding. This is from somebody who's made sure that Laith Marouf and the CMAC received public funding, right? And her government made sure that they received it without any kind of real scrutiny or examination. Anyway, Hillier says, Madam Minister, bravo for your strong words, but I'm confused why you shared a thread that shifts it on CMAC to rectify the situation with the Canadian-funded anti-Semite Laith Marouf, because I just put CMAC's telephone number into WhatsApp and it shows a photo of Laith Marouf and his wife. They are CMAC. And That's what I was saying the other day. Laith Marouf is the organization. It's his company, his baby. So this is Hillier going through the minister trying to say, oh, we're going to rectify the situation by getting CMAC to fire Laith Marouf. CMAC is Laith Marouf, right? It would be like me firing me from Canada Poly, right? I am Canada Poly. That is what I do. This is what it is. And without me, I mean, maybe somebody could step in. I don't know, like at the Late Show or something like that. I don't know. I'm not that ubiquitous, but still, it's very difficult to say, oh, well, we'll get that Canada Poly guy to deal with that hateful Mark P. Okay, I guess. Very interesting. Anyway, so Hillier says, yet at this late stage in the scandal, you just tweeted out a thread by your party colleague absurdly asking CMAC, Laith Marouf, to answer how they hired Laith Marouf for an in-depth explanation on their plans to rectify the situation. Okay, I'm gonna fire that Mark guy. Yeah, any day now I'm gonna fire him. Get that guy out of here. You're fired. Okay. Chrystia Freeland, your Minister of Diversity already tried this absurd diversion back on August 22nd, and we called him out on it in a tweet that was quoted widely in the press. Your government proudly hired Marouf to teach anti-racism. Please own up to it. Yeah, so the government is funding, and yesterday I was talking about false flag operations and how they need them to move online. This is the funding of an online false flag operation. Anti-racism and all of that is the foundation of the online and the online false flag for hate, etc. Because if anti-racism is the cultural accepted norm, then any kind of questioning or even talking about Cornerbrook and saying, shouldn't white people be there too? Because isn't it important to see yourself represented in those kind of advertisements? That would be racist. But at the same time, not having people of diverse cultures represented is also racist, and the reason that there's now rules and laws around it, right? You see, so even pointing that out, that's racist. That's what CRT is designed to do. It's racism. Okay, Roy Green says he blocked me. He blocked my Mark P account, but I don't know why Canada Poly is now unblocked. Anyway, because I thought he blocked both, but regardless. He says, come on, people, why is Laith Marouf's CMAC still being referenced as an anti-racism group in media stories? Justin Trudeau says CMAC is xenophobic, racist, and anti-Semitic. They can't simultaneously be anti-racism. Good grief. Roy, anti-racism is racism. Anti-racism is racist. That is what it is. And people in the media should be reporting it that way. Here's Dean, and he's talking about Christia's tweet as well, talking about how anti-Semitism shouldn't be funded by government, despite the fact that her government is the one funding anti-Semitism. And he says she's got some nerve after funding a Nazi battalion in the Ukraine military. Yeah. Yep. Our tax dollars at work, everybody. You're welcome. Here's an interesting thing. They're using people's political rhetoric as an excuse to say, there are concerns with this, and maybe we're not going to give it royal assent. Here's Janet French, and she's reporting on the Lieutenant Governor Salma Lakhani. Sorry if I've got that wrong. Alberta's Lieutenant Governor Salma Lakhani says she would seek independent expert advice before giving any Alberta Sovereignty Act royal assent. Expert advice? Whose expert advice? The whole point of being self-governed is that the legislature tells you what they want, and they pass it. And if you don't see any problems or conflicts with current laws and rules, etc., then you give it royal assent. Expert advice. A third party? Are they Masons? Although some people see the lieutenant governor role as purely ceremonial, Lakhani said that her constitutional duties are the most important part of her job, and she is prepared for any backlash if she has to stand up for the rule of law. The rule of law is a term that Biden uses a lot. Boris Johnson used a lot. Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland use a lot. Rules-based order is another one. And all of that means you do what we say when we say it, and don't question things too much. And that's what they want rule of law to mean. That's the changing meaning of rule of law. And what she means by she's willing and prepared for any backlash. Remember the kind of poop-eating grin on this guy's face, right? The smug look, according to the protester who was recording it. That's what they mean. They're going to stand there and look smug while you protest because they're committed to their nonsense ideology. They're committed to it. and they say, oh, well, I'm just doing my job. I'm committed to backlash because this is important because our democracy, blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's an excuse to shut down the proper channels and the proper modes of passing things like the Sovereignty Act. And it's going to be wild. It's going to be wild because there's a certain point where things move past speaking. And I hope we don't get there. I hope we don't. I hope we avoid that. But it seems like it doesn't seem like these communists, I think that's the best term for it, are going to stop until people make them stop. And boos aren't going to do it. Right? Here is, hold on a second, that might be the title. Be a good Halloween title. Here's the email that Joe Biden and his representatives sent to Facebook. Vince is reporting, according to newly released emails obtained by state attorney generals, Facebook and Biden administration arranged weekly and monthly calls to discuss what to censor on the platform. And you can see the email here. There are more emails talking about censorship, etc. Here's Roman Baber. He's talking about censorship and the changed ability for debate in Ontario, specifically after COVID. And this is a Zuby thread, but question, what was the COVID discussion like in your respective countries? In Canada, Ontario, nobody was allowed to question the official narrative or even have a public debate. And Roman Baber goes through this pretty well in this article, and I thought it was worthwhile, so we'll go through a little bit of it. There's a Voltaire quote he starts out with. He says, "I may not agree with your opinion, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Right? And I know that the death part's in there because Cam Guthrie quoted that to me one time because he disagreed with what I said, but he's agreed with my right to say it. I was like, what part do you disagree with? Please be specific. I think we were talking about immigration and the impact on housing. And I was like, are you kidding? Anyway, regardless. A Voltaire quote, and no longer, not anymore, says Roman Baber, our COVID response ushered in a new era. No more sensible disagreement. Well-meaning politicians, scientists, doctors, and professionals were not allowed to express an opinion different from the public health officials or government talking points under the guise of safety. For your safety, comrade. Those who dared to question the mainstream narrative over the past few years were removed from the political parties, myself included, says Roman, lost their jobs, were investigated, or were reprimanded by their regulators. Canadians who simply wanted to have a civil conversation about a new virus and the unprecedented response were demonized by the media and on social media. The silencing of dissent under the threat of cancellation or loss of livelihood is not limited to COVID. Complex scientific issues such as the environment are off the debate table. Conformity to climate science is the only option, as if the science is certain or static, which it cannot be by definition. Yeah, the climate stuff is really, really funny. You're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to discuss it. And it's very clear and obvious that nothing has changed, but no amount of money will put the power of seasonal weather in our hands. And seasonal weather, we can't stop winter from coming. We can't stop spring from coming. We can't stop summer from coming, and so on and so forth. And it's going to keep coming. And anybody who says, it's changing, it's not the same, I urge them to get a farmer's almanac. It's changing all the time. And there's no amount of tax dollars that's going to stop it. Okay. And if you can put a number on it, put a number on it. Let's talk about it. What are you going to do with that money? Right? Like, oh, if unending tax forever is not a solution to climate change. I'm sorry. It's just not. Anyway, science cannot evolve and free societies cannot function when debate is forbidden or when freedom of expression is abridged. When it is, serious results tend to be catastrophic. For the past few years, the only thing I sought was to have a civil and sensible conversation, a discussion about the objective harm of lockdowns, the medical ethics of mandates, the efficacy of plexiglass against an airborne virus, or the prohibition against buying crayons at the dollar store because science, right? Yeah, all of these things were insane things that we allowed the government to do because for your safety, comrade. Of course you can't buy crayons. That's non-essential. I have a 4-year-old and he wants to color something. Who says it's not essential? Back to this. Even Rosemary Barton of the CBC acknowledged during a May 22 interview with me that she doesn't think anyone is denying the side effects of the lockdown. Such an utterance would have been unthinkable in 2020 or early 2021 when I was removed from the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party caucus in the dark days of January 2021 for calling on the Ford government to end the lockdowns. Canadians were afraid to articulate any opposition, for it would be equated with wanting to kill grandma. Remember that? Yeah. The historical record is being corrected. More observers and stakeholders recognize that lockdowns were damaging to our physical health, our mental health, our children, and our economy. The Centers for Disease Control in the U.S. has revised its treatment guidelines and eliminated any distinction between those who have been vaccinated against COVID-19 and those who have not, have made a different medical choice to not be vaccinated. Hence, the COVID dogma created by mandates results in division and irreparable harm. Our country stigmatized and demonized a sizable portion of the population and caused long-term trauma, especially to young people, the effect of which cannot be underestimated. Free speech is the holy grail of all rights because through speech we defend all other rights and all other Canadians. But free speech is necessary not just for democracy, it's a must for good public policy. Disagreements in Parliament, on TV, in the boardroom, or in the classroom is a good thing. A great number of perspectives affords decision makers with better and nuanced choices. So free speech is the cornerstone of our democracy. And anybody who tells you different is, trying to implement their own tyrannical communist regime, it seems. In Ireland, I'll show you some things that are happening across the way as well. Independent Ireland says details of ban on gas and oil home heating is to be known within weeks. The environment minister, they're trying to make using oil and gas heating systems in new homes economically not viable, but the other systems don't work as well, so people still opt for the traditional ones. And so, right, Ireland is a little bit, it's not as cold as here, but it does get cold, right? So you do need a heating system and all of that. But they're trying to use heat pumps in the UK as well. They're taking things, problems we solved, and it seems like they're breaking them in order to reshape them. Well, it's my jet analogy, right? Jumping out of the airplane without an airplane to jump into. And they break the current technology in order to force you out of the plane. Here's German gas prices. Apparently it's 2.23, and then at midnight the gas prices tick up. This is euros. Not that I didn't realize how expensive this Europe was, but holy smoke.
Wow.
240, 252. Very expensive, right? So that's in German gasoline prices exploding overnight. Expensive. Condo Chris says, was just talking to a guy in the energy business, and he said to me, what happens when there's a fire in California or a hurricane in Florida and the grid goes down and they need to evacuate everyone, but they all have EVs? What kind of catastrophe would that be? And here is Los Angeles. Apparently, this is a Daily Mail article that got picked up by Flipboard. And don't panic. LA public officials accidentally broadcast TV warning telling entire city to evacuate. So yeah, this is the warning. Oh, it's not going to pop up, but it's got all of the counties of Los Angeles being told to evacuate. So what happens when it's an EV? What happens when the entire population, or let's say 80% of the population has an EV and they've had 3 days of do not charge your vehicles because of reasons for electricity purposes or whatever. And then they say, evacuate, the grid's going down. Nobody can get anywhere. You're done, right? Get on the bus. How many gas buses do you have? Right? Ooh, yowza. Scary stuff. And so I don't think the electric car thing will actually take off. I don't think it'll take off at scale. The government is trying to buy enough to kickstart it and then force people over to it. I think it'll collapse before then. I don't think we can mine the material. I don't think we can create the cars in a timely fashion. But I could be wrong. The government may have a trick or two up its sleeve. James says, in Germany, all over Germany, farmers are protesting against government policies that threaten their livelihoods. These protests are happening across Europe and are largely ignored by the legacy media. So there's protests. The Dutch farmers I still hear are protesting. So there are things happening. People are pushing back. Will it be enough? What do you think? I don't know. I really don't know. It seems like it's up in the air. It seems like there's a turn. It seems like there's a turning point, and it seems like a hard turning point too. It seems like there are people who are waking up who weren't expected to wake up at this point. I'm not sure, but it seems like we're approaching a boiling point. We've had a few, and we've gone through them twisting and turning in different ways, right? We've gone through them through 2 more weeks to flatten the curve, or crackdowns on this will be a winter of unvaccinated deaths or whatever, dark winter of unvaccinated misery or something like that. Every time there seems to get to a boil, there seems to be another distraction, another you're at fault. And so how does this all play out? It seems like if they can keep kicking the can down the road, they will, because it is so effective at just doing nothing. Maintaining the status quo moves their pieces closer to checkmate, because there's so much momentum behind all of the stuff that they're doing, and it's so many different angles that they don't have to do anything. It's doing itself, right? And all they have to do is keep shutting down the opposition, and that's what they're focused on. So is something going to change? Like I said, it seems like we're hitting a hard turn, but they have been able to navigate those in the last 2 years anyway, without much problem that I've seen. So what's going to happen? Wait and see, I guess. That's enough out of me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out Speaking Moistly and all the other stuff I do on there. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.